guys, and welcome back to my channel for another midweek mystery video. This week we're covering the case of 19-year-old Susan Swedell. She disappeared from Lake Elmo, Minnesota just over 30 years ago on the 19th of January 1988. Ever since then, Susan's life and her whereabouts has been a complete mystery. Susan's case was quiet for years. Even when she first disappeared, it never got that huge media attention that a lot of other cases do. But recently, because of the 30-year anniversary, there's been a renewed interest. This case makes my head hurt. I cannot make sense of it one way or another. There is just no viable explanation for what happened to Susan here. Like I said, Susan was 19 years old and she was quite active with her local church, singing in the choir and playing handbells. She loved acting, and her favourite movie of all time was Sound of Music. She had graduated a couple of years earlier from Stillwater Area High School, where she was described as a shy type, quite quiet. She wasn't exactly a popular kid, but she kept her head down and did her work. She wasn't bullied, but she was just a bit invisible. She then went to the University of Wisconsin River Falls, where she studied psychology and foreign languages, but she dropped out after just 2 semesters because she decided that she just didn't like living away from home. She lived with her mother and her sister, and she was really close to them. Her parents got divorced many years earlier, and her relationship with her dad wasn't the best. But her mum and her sister, she was like best friends with them, especially her sister. They were so close. Her sister Christine described her as bubbly, shy, but really outgoing and fun once you got to know her. But she also said that she was incredibly naive, very much that trusting country girl. Even though she struggled to make friends in high school, by the time she was 19, she had a nice, loving group of friends and she was well liked. But she was struggling a bit with depression. After dropping out of university, she struggled to find a job and she was having like boyfriend troubles, and she just was struggling to really find where she belonged. Susan was Caucasian, she was 5'4" and only about 100 pounds, so she was very petite. She had sandy brown hair and hazel eyes, her ears were pierced, and she was extremely nearsighted, meaning that she needed to wear her glasses pretty much at all times. She'd also had extensive dental work done. At the time she disappeared, Susan was working 2 different part-time jobs, both at the St. Croix Mall, which was about a 15-minute drive away from her home. She worked one job in a clothes store called Body and Soul, and she did another job at Kmart. She was actually working at Kmart on the day she disappeared, and there was a massive blizzard. And huge blizzards are just part of living in Minnesota in January. They happen a lot. At some point towards the end of her shift, Susan and Kathy speak on the phone, and there's conflicting reports as to who called who. Kathy's telling Susan that the blizzard's really bad and she's really concerned about her driving home in this weather, and so asks her to maybe go to her dad's who lives closer instead. But Susan says no, she wants to come home. She'll probably be home a little bit later than usual, but she wants to like come home and watch a movie and just be with her mum and sister. Now, something worth noting is that Susan was actually really scared of storms. She did not like them, and driving in the snow would have been absolutely terrifying for her. But she didn't really have a choice, she had to get home somehow. Now on this particular day, the conditions were really awful. You could look out the window and not be able to see the houses on the other side of the street because the snow was so thick. Just during that blizzard alone, 7.5 inches of snow fell. For me, somebody who lives in the south of England and probably sees like proper snow maybe every 2-3 years, that sounds like a lot, but I'm not entirely sure how much that would be for Minnesotans. Like, if you live in Minnesota, is that a lot of snow or is that just kind of standard? I just think it'll be interesting to know that bit of context, because for me, the idea of driving home in that sounds like unthinkable, but maybe for Susan it was just standard. Susan did ask her mum on the phone what the safest route home would be, and her mum told her, and so Susan was definitely intending on driving home. They had a whole conversation about it. Now, her colleagues at Kmart noted how before Susan ended her shift, she got changed out of the red pantsuit she was wearing and put on a little denim miniskirt and a sweater. And this was just very strange, especially considering the weather conditions outside. Her mum and investigators speculate that Susan was intending to meet somebody after work, which is why she was getting so dressed up. Susan was the type to dress to impress. She wouldn't ever go out looking sloppy. She always liked to go out and look her best. And actually, personally, I really relate to Susan. A lot of what I've read about her, being very shy but outgoing once you get to know her, not being the most popular person, always wanting to dress to impress, I get that. So maybe to a lot of people it seems like really crazy that Susan was like putting on a miniskirt. It sounds like something I would do, especially if I was going to be meeting somebody, not necessarily somebody who I was interested in, but just anybody. I just want to look my best a lot of the time, and Susan was the same. So the general consensus is that Susan was going to meet somebody after work, which is already a little bit strange because she's told to Mum that she's going to be home just a little bit later because of the snow. On a regular day, Susan's drive home should have been about 15 minutes, but longer in the snow. But it got later and later and Susan never arrived. Susan's mum and sister contact the police at about 11 p.m, having images of Susan in her car in a ditch at the side of the road, having skidded off on the ice. The Washington County Sheriff's Department send out some officers just to look at the sides of the road on the route from the St. Croix Mall to the home. And they do find Susan's car pretty quickly. She drove a 1975 maroon coloured Oldsmobile Cutlass, and they find her car just parked up at a gas station. This was only about a mile away from their home, but Susan was nowhere to be seen. So obviously at this point they're thinking that Susan couldn't deal with the drive home in the harsh conditions, so she just parks her car up and decides to walk home the rest of the way. Only they search the roads and they search the footpaths and ditches at the sides of the road, and they still can't find her. She'd parked up at a K station and it was closed by the time the police got there, so they had to wait until the next day to talk to the gas station attendant who was on duty. I'm just going to put in a map here to give you a little bit of context. The K station is now a holiday superstore, so that's what you'll see it marked as. And what used to be the Kmart where Susan worked is now a company called the Anderson Corporation, so just so you don't get confused. But that's sort of like the road that Susan was most likely to drive on. So the next day, Susan is officially reported as a missing person around 3-4 p.m. in the afternoon, and officers speak to the gas station attendant who was on duty, and what they find out from this attendant changes the entire course of their investigation. She says that she saw Susan pull up at the gas station around 9:15 to 9:30 that night. However, she wasn't alone. She was followed by another car. Susan parks up and then gets out of her car and goes over to the guy in the other car and just starts speaking to him. The other vehicle was a light coloured older car with sort of fancy sport wheels. It seemed to be in good shape, but it was quite dirty. Now you've got to bear in mind that this station attendant was just looking out through a snow covered window, so it's very likely that some of the memories she has are a little bit blurred because she couldn't even see properly in the first place. So Susan and this man stand there speaking for about 15 minutes, and it doesn't seem like they're strangers. They seem like they know each other. Maybe not the best of friends, but they're definitely acquaintances. It's not awkward, they're just chatting away. And it seemed like this was planned, like Susan expected this guy to pull up behind her. This man was about 5'11" to 6'2", so pretty tall. He had long, dark blonde, sort of sandy coloured hair, curled or wavy down to his shoulders. He was unshaven and he was appropriately dressed for the cold, unlike Susan, who was still in her miniskirt. This guy was bundled up, wearing a hat and lots of layers. The man drove his car up to the pump where he filled up with petrol whilst the two of them continued chatting. They then came into the station to pay. And now the attendant can't remember what they were speaking about. She didn't pay much attention to it at the time because it didn't seem weird. They seemed like they knew each other. Susan then asked the attendant if she's okay to leave her car parked overnight. And I think the attendant kind of said, like, you can leave it here, but you can't leave it exactly where you parked it. You just need to move it. So Susan did that. And then Susan gets into the car with this other guy and they leave westbound in the direction that was towards Susan's house. It's worth noting that Susan did not seem distressed at all. She wasn't forced to get into this other car. She willingly got into it. Now the police really didn't take Susan's disappearance seriously at first, just chalking her down to a runaway. She was 19 years old, an adult, she could make her own choices, and from what the gas station attendant said, Susan didn't get into this car by force, like she chose to go with him. The attendant went to the police station where she worked with a sketch artist to draw up a composite sketch of the guy that Susan left with, which I'll put up here now. But other than that, not much was really done. I'm not even convinced a formal statement was taken at this point. Of course, this was 1988. There was no CCTV at either the Kmart or the K station. 10 years later, the police start investigating Susan's case again. I'm not entirely sure what prompted them to sort of have a new look at the case, but luckily they did. And they start actually going around and this time taking formal statements from everyone, including the gas station attendant. Now this was 10 years later, and the passage of time can really alter people's memories. If you asked me about a random day 10 years ago, I couldn't tell you details, and I'm sure that you would be the same. So of course, when they re-interview the attendant, she tells them what she remembers, but a lot of the details have changed. Instead of the guy driving a light coloured car, it now becomes a dark coloured car. Instead of it being about 9:15 at night that they arrived, it becomes about 6 p.m. I'm definitely more inclined to believe the events that she told when it first happened rather than her formal interview 10 years later. But it does make me wonder what important details were lost in those 10 years. Still to this day, Susan Swedell is simply a missing persons case. Like I said, it totally seems like she got into the car voluntarily and they drove away together. There's absolutely zero evidence to point to forced abduction, kidnapping, false imprisonment, or even murder. There's no evidence to suggest any of that. All they know is that Susan got into this man's car and they drove away. It's still an open case and the police are still looking into it, and there's a $25,000 reward, but that doesn't make it a homicide case or an abduction case. She's just missing. The general consensus between both Susan's family and the police is that something more sinister happened to her, but what can they do when there's no evidence? When the police first found Susan's car on the 19th of January, they found inside her driver's license, her handbag, and her glasses. Now, like I said earlier, Susan was extremely nearsighted and she needed her glasses to see pretty much. And her mum believes that the fact that Susan left the glasses in her car shows that she 100% intended to come back. Like, she did not have good sight at all, and it would have been really inconvenient for her not having them. So her mum thinks that Susan intended just to go off for a little bit and then come back and get her glasses. Her driver's license, maybe I understand her leaving it there. I mean, you don't really need your driver's license unless you're driving. Her handbag, I do have a bit of an issue with. Personally, if I'm getting out of my car, I take my bag with me every single time, because you don't want to risk somebody peering in, seeing a handbag there and then breaking into your car, especially if you're intending on leaving it on its own for a while. I would be intrigued to know what Susan had in her bag. Did she have money? Did she have makeup? Did she have like other personal items, like things she might have needed? Because this would probably give you an idea of how long Susan was intending to disappear off to. If Susan was, for example, going on a date with this person, you would expect for her to take her bag with her makeup in. Now, police don't take the car in for evidence. I don't know if they dusted for fingerprints. I don't know if they looked for DNA. Obviously, this was the late 1980s and DNA testing did definitely exist, but it's definitely still in its early stages. So I don't know if the police sort of looked for DNA. I don't know what they did with the car at the scene. But the next day, her mum, Kathy, asked for the car to be brought to the house. So the car gets towed to the house where it sits in the street for 5 days before Kathy one day decides that she needs to go to the supermarket just to get some food. So Kathy gets in the car, and as she's driving it, it starts smoking and spluttering, so she has to take it to a mechanic's. She takes it to Lake Elmo Repair. It doesn't take the mechanic long to realise what the problem was. The petcock on the radiator was loose and therefore all of the water was leaking out and the car was overheating. If you don't know, the petcock is just a small valve on the bottom of the radiator and it doesn't come loose easily. It should technically only come loose if it's actually loosened by hand, or maybe if your car's been in an accident of some kind. A lot of people say that it is literally impossible for this valve to come loose unless it's actually been tampered with, like somebody's done it by hand. But I did give it a quick Google just because I was curious, and there are reports on Google of people saying that theirs has just come loose. So take from that what you will. The mechanic and investigators theorised that somebody had tampered with this on purpose. Somebody had put their hand under the radiator and loosened it. Was it possible that while Susan was at work, somebody had tampered with the car and loosened the petcock and then waited for her, knowing that when she drove home, she would eventually break down and not be able to make it the entire way? So this person follows her. Or was the petcock being loose just a complete coincidence? Police started to look more deeply into Susan's personal life to see if they could get any clues as to what happened to her. They didn't really find anything crazy or out of the ordinary for a 19-year-old girl. She was pretty much just your standard teenager. So her and her boyfriend had been going out for about 9 months at the time that Susan disappeared. There are a lot of reports saying that he was actually her ex-boyfriend, but he personally said they were actually just very on and off. They were constantly breaking up and getting back together. Just standard teenage relationship. And she'd actually had plans to see him the night she disappeared, but he'd called her at work and said because the weather is just not going to be safe for them to leave their houses. So they were going to reorganise for another time, but they were still going to call each other when Susan got home. And just because I know that everyone loves to suspect the boyfriend in cases like this, the police very much looked into him and he was completely cleared of having anything to do with it. So Susan just wasn't entirely happy in her relationship. There are lots of reports saying that he just wasn't making her that happy. And there was quite a big age difference. Susan was 19 and he was 16. And there was just a lot of complications that came with that. So Susan had actually started going out quite a lot, dancing with her friends, and quite often she went to a club called Bumpers. Now Bumpers was a teenage club, it was non-alcoholic, but Susan went there a lot with friends. And Susan, like a lot of 19-year-old girls, was obsessed with boys. Even though she had this on-off boyfriend relationship kind of thing, she loved to talk about boys and talk to boys. Susan craved male attention and she just lapped up. So if a boy on one of these nights out showed her attention, she'd be all over it. And there are reports of men being creepy towards her at the clubs, maybe showing her a bit too much attention. There's one guy in particular that her sister remembers being very, very forward and just a bit over the top. To be honest, this very much could be something significant. Or it could just be men being creepy in clubs, as they do. And Susan would also use chat lines to speak to boys. And I just want to clarify, when I say chat lines, I do not mean anything sexual in nature whatsoever. I think now in 2018, when you think of chat lines, or especially for somebody of my age who was born in the 90s, you think of sort of like the sexual chat lines and things like that. That isn't what I'm talking about here. In the late 1980s, it was kind of the teenagers' form of social media, can you say? Like, we have Twitter and Instagram. They had chat lines where you could call up this number and talk to up to 9 other teenagers from across the country, and you could just chat and socialise, but you would rack up a hell of a bill. Susan apparently racked up about $300 in chat line bills. I don't know if her mum knew about her sort of chat line, I don't want to say addiction, but her love for chat lines at the time. But apparently in Susan's room, they would find like post-it notes, like different boys' numbers written on them, which you can assume are different boys that she met on chat lines. I know there's going to be a lot of people in the comments talking about how Susan had a boyfriend, but she was still talking to all these other boys, and it's like not morally right. From what I could gather, they were very much on and off, and Susan wasn't happy. She was very depressed, and her boyfriend knew this. I think her boyfriend was quite aware of what she was like. He was like infatuated with her and he was trying to work through it, but I don't think Susan was ever really in it. And everyone makes questionable decisions, especially when you're a teenager. Co-workers at Kmart also reported that Susan was receiving a lot of phone calls in work, so much so that the managers had to sit her down and be like, this needs to stop, it's ridiculous. Like per shift, I think the shifts are about 6 to 8 hours long, she was getting like 5 phone calls. Some would obviously be from her boyfriend and her sister and her mum, but most of them were from this same man. Now reportedly this man was called Dale, or some reports said it was Dave. Again, the passage of time very much confuses details like this. Now Susan had actually mentioned to her mum and her sister that she was dating somebody called Dale, and she said that Dale was actually a stripper. And of course Kathy was very much like, what? This is very, very strange. I want to meet this man. And Susan agreed. Susan was like, yeah, of course you can meet him. But she never did. So can we assume the man that kept calling Susan at Kmart was Dale? Most likely, but we can't say that 100%. There are also reports of Susan being harassed by a male at her other job in Body and Soul. It seems very strange that just in the few weeks before she disappeared, so many different men were coming and going in her life. Now, I'm not sure if the police pulled the phone records from Kmart when Susan first went missing. Like I said, they didn't really look into Susan's disappearance that much because they just thought, she's a runaway, what can we do? But I'm pretty sure that if they pulled the phone records from the Kmart, they probably could have figured out this number that kept calling Susan. And maybe from there it would have led them to a person of interest. But of course, when they re-reviewed the case 10 years later, I reckon it was probably too late to get those kinds of phone records. Of course, maybe if they had done that, it would just led them to a payphone and it would have been a dead end. But it would have been interesting to know. I'm sure you think you probably heard all of the twists and turns in this case by this point, but you most definitely have not. So a week later, Kathy and Christine, Susan's sister, go back to work and school respectively. Christine was 3 years younger than Susan, she was 16, so she was still in school. And she arrives home from school that day and goes to get the spare key. Now this was a small town in Minnesota in the late 1980s, so people just sort of left their keys out the front of their house. And so Christine comes home and tries to get the key. Now they had like a shelf next to their front door, and apparently the key would always be under like an object on the shelf, and so Christine goes to get it and it's not there. She's kind of freaking out a little bit because she's like, I don't have another key, this is the only key I have, my mum's at work, I have no other way of getting into the house. So she's looking around for it everywhere and she cannot find it. And bear in mind at this point it's only Christine and Kathy who are living in the house. Like, it should have been there and it wasn't. Eventually she does find it on the shelf, but it's like pushed right into the back corner. And I actually would want to know how big this shelf was. If it was just like a tiny shelf like this, then maybe it'd be understandable that it just like flung into the corner. But if it was a bigger shelf, it's a little bit more questionable. But yeah, so she finds the key in the corner and just thinks, oh, that's a bit weird. And so lets herself into the house. And as soon as she goes into the house, she notices this sickly sweet smell. Now, she said at the time she had no idea what the smell was. It just didn't smell like her house and it was very noticeable. But years later, she said that it was probably actually the smell of marijuana, although she can't confirm it 100% obviously. So she carries on walking and enters the kitchen. Now when she gets into the kitchen, she notices that there's a lot of dirty dishes in the sink. And she was the last one to leave that morning. When she left that morning for school, it was only her dirty dishes, so a bowl and a cup. But now there was more than that in there, and Christine was very confused and she just knew that something was up. She actually feels really, really scared, so she just calls her mum and tells her mum, like, you have to come home straight away. Something's not right. She doesn't even go upstairs. She just sort of like sits, I think, at the kitchen table and waits for her mum to come home. Later that night, Christine goes into Susan's room and notices under Susan's bed the red pantsuit that she was wearing the day she disappeared. It was sort of curled up in a ball, just shoved under her bed, as Susan always did with her clothes, you know, just take them off and just throw them on the ground. And this was very, very strange. And I don't think this was a uniform either. I saw a lot of people online saying that, well, if she had to wear a uniform to Kmart, of course there's going to be more than one. But I'm pretty sure that she didn't have to wear a uniform. This red pantsuit was like her own clothing, and she was definitely wearing it the day she disappeared before she took it off and changed into the miniskirt and sweater. But now it was under her bed. It seemed like Susan had come home, but nothing was missing. If, say, she was running away and she came home to pack a bag, this would maybe make sense, but none of her clothes were gone, none of her personal items, no makeup, no grooming products, nothing. There were just some dirty dishes in the sink and this red pantsuit under her bed. Everything else was exactly as it was. If Susan came home and didn't take anything with her, why make it so obvious she'd been there? If she just wanted to sneak in and out, then she wouldn't leave anything behind her. She especially probably wouldn't leave the outfit she was wearing that day in such an obvious place. Maybe she had a stash of money hidden away and literally just came home to get the money. But again, it doesn't explain why she'd just leave the red pantsuit there. It's such an obvious clue. Obviously, Kathy and Christine reported it to the police, but nobody came round to look for fingerprints or DNA. They just didn't do anything about it. The family and Susan's disappearance very much seems to just fall between the cracks. Quite a few years later, I think, Kathy and Christine both had their DNA entered into a sort of national database, the first in Minnesotan history. So if an unidentified body is found and they run the DNA through this database, if it's Susan, it will flag a match. In 1990, investigators received just 3 tips about possible sightings of Susan. She was allegedly spotted at a waterworks in Centerville, at a Burger King in northeast Minneapolis, and at a Hardee's in Ashland, Tennessee. That's it. In 2006, activity was detected on Susan's social security number and they immediately flagged this with Susan's family. However, it just turned out to be identity theft. A woman in California was using Susan's social security to try and get into the military. So let's talk about some theories here, and we'll start with the fact that maybe Susan did run away. At first glance with this case, I thought that there was absolutely no chance Susan ran away. Like, it just didn't make sense to me. But the more I looked into it, the more I thought that it could be possible. It seemed like she had a happy life, but I think under the surface, she was really, really struggling. She'd struggled to get a job, she had this depression. I don't think she was entirely happy in the job that she was, or the jobs that she was now in. I think as close as she was with her mum and sister, they were arguing all the time. She wasn't close with her dad. Her and her boyfriend were just on and off constantly. He wasn't giving her what she needed. And maybe she just craved this other life. A lot of people would have these kinds of things happen to them, and you don't just run away and start a new life, but you don't really know what kind of mental state Susan was in. Maybe she just had enough and just decided that that's it, I'm going. It does seem weird though that her little sister was her best friend, and it's not just this coming from Christine. Everyone who knew Susan said that her and Christine were like so close, almost weirdly close for sisters. They were like inseparable. But maybe Susan just made a snap decision one day and then she just couldn't go back on it, and now it's been 30 years and she just doesn't know what to do. Let's say she met a guy, maybe this stripper Dale, and he proposed running away and starting a new life. And like I've said before, Susan was naive. She was that country girl. She just wanted to trust people and she was easily led, and this guy maybe just persuaded her like, you just need to leave, get out, we'll go together. And maybe that's what happened. But what doesn't make sense to me is how Susan had other plans that night. She was gonna see her boyfriend. She'd told her mum she was gonna come home and they were gonna watch a movie. Now, if her boyfriend or ex-boyfriend, whatever they were, hadn't called her at work to like cancel, Susan was going to be seeing him. And it's not like now where we have our smartphones and we can talk to anybody like instantly. Susan would have had to have got this call from her boyfriend and then hung up and thought, who should I see? And then called up somebody else and made plans. And then she's called up her mum, or her mum's called her, and she said, I'm going to come home. I might be a little bit late, but I'll be there. And why tell your mum you're going to be home and make plans for the evening, then don't turn up, like, and know that you're not going to turn up? It just seems very unnecessarily cruel, and Susan wasn't cruel. And also it's quite obvious from where Susan's car was parked up at the K station, she was only a mile away from home, so she was clearly driving home. Unless she'd planned, obviously, to abandon her car there to make it look like something else had happened. But why make it look like something's happened? If you're gonna run away, just run away. Don't try and create this false narrative. It just doesn't seem like the Susan that everybody knew. Obviously, the most damning piece of evidence for the runaway theory is that somebody was clearly in the house a week later, and somebody had been watching the house as well. This was the first day that Christine had gone back to school and Kathy had gone back to work, so somebody knew that neither of them were in the house. But like I said, nothing was taken. If Susan was running away, then she would have come in and packed a bag and then left, unless she was just taking money. But still, you're going to take some things with you, especially your glasses. It baffles me as to if she was running away, why she'd leave her glasses. That just makes no sense. They're expensive. She needs to know her exact prescription. If she like had to go and get tested for like new glasses, then surely she would have been spotted, somebody would have picked up on that. For me, it's that one tiny fact, the fact that she left her glasses in her car. Well, that suggests to me that she intended to come back because her sight was so bad. Why would she leave them? Maybe leaving the ID and leaving your handbag behind, that might be explainable, but she would have been driving wearing her glasses. Like, her glasses would have been on her face while she was driving when she parked up at the Kmart. So why would she take them off unless she's trying to impress this guy? But if you're planning on like running away with him and leaving, you just take your glasses. She also had a paycheck waiting for her at her job which she hadn't picked up, and if she was running away, I'm sure she would have picked up this paycheck because you're going to need every penny that you have, and she didn't pick it up, which for me is another big red flag saying that she didn't run away. I personally find it hard to believe that she ran away. I mean, there's definitely things that point to it, but I just don't think she would have left her mum and sister. I don't think she would have stayed out of contact with them for 30 years. If she had run away, I think she probably would have got in contact after a few months, and she hasn't done that. And with that, let's move on to the second theory, that somebody abducted her, murdered her, somebody brought her to harm. Like I've mentioned before, Susan had a lot of males in and out of her life in the few weeks leading up to her disappearance. She was very trusting. She just wanted attention. She wanted love. She wanted somebody. And if a male came into her life and offered her all of this, she would have been infatuated. Now, the fact that Susan got changed before she left work that day suggests that she probably was planning on meeting somebody. But what were these plans? She told her mum she was coming home. She had plans to see her boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, whatever. And like I said, it was 1988, so she wouldn't have had easy access to talk to these people. So she would have had to have called somebody from work to make plans and be like, I'll meet you at this time here. This case would be a hell of a lot more straightforward if she just hadn't got changed out of her red pantsuit, or if the weather was different. The fact that she got changed before she left work leads to so many different theories. I personally think that somebody waited for Susan to finish work that day, whether she knew they were there or she didn't. The fact that she got changed leads me to believe that she probably knew they'd be there. Or maybe it was somebody who worked at Kmart who she wanted to impress, or somebody she knew that she might run into in the car park and she wanted to impress them. So maybe she didn't have plans, she just had somebody who she had a bit of a crush on and was like, they can't see me in this red pantsuit, I'm gonna get changed into something cuter. Somebody was waiting for her after work who had sinister intentions that Susan didn't pick up on. This person possibly knew where Susan parked her car, and so while she was in work, they lifted up the hood and messed with the petcock. Which suggests two different things. A, that this person knew Susan well enough to know which one was her car, or he'd been following her long enough to know which one was her car. And 2, this person had at least a basic knowledge of mechanics. Susan bumps into this person as she leaves work, and they have a brief conversation, and the man possibly says to her, like, are you sure you're okay to drive home in this weather? I can give you a lift. And Susan's like, no, I'm fine. And the man says, tell you what, I'll follow you home to make sure you get home safe. And this man knows that her car's going to break down. Of course, this is just me theorising here, but stay with me. So this man follows Susan home, and Susan, as she's only a mile away from home, decides she has to pull over because her car is just playing up so badly. So this man pulls up behind her and is like, good job I followed you home. He fills up with petrol and then says to her, tell you what, I'll drop you home, you can come get your car in the morning. Which could be why Susan left her things in the car, just was like, oh, I'll be back in the morning, I'll get it all then. And when they left the petrol station, they did head in the correct direction. They headed towards Susan's house. If this is the case, this person was calculated and they planned to hurt Susan. But there's one thing that pretty much everyone's in agreement with in this case, and that's that this person wasn't a stranger. Susan knew them. She felt comfortable enough to let them give her a lift home. They were acting friendly with each other. She wasn't scared. And Susan was a shy and timid person, so this would have meant a lot. So if this is the case, Susan's got in somebody's car and they've driven her somewhere and possibly harmed her, or they've abducted her, how did Susan come home a week later to put her red pantsuit under her bed? Now, from everything I've read, Susan didn't smoke and she definitely didn't do drugs. So the fact that the house most likely smelled of marijuana suggests that when Susan arrived home, she wasn't alone. I don't know how many dirty dishes were in the sink, but I would like to know if it was enough for just one person or maybe 2. Maybe Susan was being held captive at this point, and her captor knew that Susan had a stash of money, so they go home so Susan can get this money, but not knowing what to do, knowing that she can't leave anything too obvious, she leaves her red pantsuit under her bed just to maybe sign to her sister. Or maybe just her captor or her murderer or whoever this person was returned home as part of a mind game. It is questionable how they knew where to find the key, but I don't think it would have been hard to find. It was literally on a shelf next to the front door, so I think it could have been found pretty easily. Let's circle back to this Dale guy, the stripper that I mentioned earlier. Kathy had specifically mentioned that she wanted to meet Dale. She wanted to know who this stripper guy was that her daughter was talking to or hanging out with. I really don't know how serious Susan was about this person, how many dates they'd gone on, if they'd even gone on any dates, if they met on chat lines. I really don't know any of these details. Maybe that night after her boyfriend cancelled on her, Susan saw it as a prime opportunity to introduce her mum to Dale. So Susan calls Dale at work and says, my mum wants to meet you, we'll head back together. So Susan says, I've still got to get my car back, so just follow me home and we'll go home together. Dale obviously doesn't have the best intentions, loosens a petcock, and everything happens from there, as I just said. A lot of detectives on the case believe that Susan did come to harm, she didn't run away, and that somebody did hurt her because they refused to believe that she wouldn't have got in contact with her family. She wasn't that kind of person, and I cannot stress that enough. She wasn't malicious, she wasn't cruel, she was a nice person who loved her family. A lot of them also think that whoever did this to Susan is a local and still lives locally. I would like to think that Susan's still alive, living somewhere happily, possibly with a family, and she had her own reasons for running away, but honestly, I just don't believe it. If the case was taken seriously from the beginning, the car dusted for prints, it taken in for evidence, when there was evidence of somebody else being in the home, maybe if that was dusted for fingerprints as well, they may have found something. If they looked at phone records, they might have found something. But it just wasn't taken seriously from the beginning. I truly believe that this case has a really good chance of being solved. I think if they just find one clue or one person speaks, because somebody knows, there's one person out there at least who knows what happens to Susan. If they just get this one clue, this one piece of information, I think this case could be solved pretty easily. And I think with the 30th anniversary, there's a lot more attention around this, more than there has ever been before, especially with social media. So maybe they will get this information they need. As always, I'd be really intrigued to hear all of your theories about Susan, what you think happened to her. Put them all in the comments down below. Make sure you subscribe to my channel. There'll be a new mystery video up next Wednesday, 4:30 PM every single week. And I will see you there. Bye guys.